Hey guys, welcome back to the Minijet YouTube channel. Today is episode 4 of our CUB build series, and today we're going to be going through everything that you need to know to get the intake installed into the hull of your boat. So with that, let's jump into the shop and get to it. All right, Ben, things are looking good over here.
Yeah.
Looks like you've cut the hole out.
Yeah, I cut the hole. I use the convenient guide markers that are all around here. You just have to cut a few little tabs out. And yeah, so it already fits on this boat, Sea-Doo Spark intake perfectly.
And so I noticed that you did have to cut a little bit extra down here.
Yeah, so depending if you're installing UHMW plastic on your boat or not, we use a 1/2 inch thickness. This is just a little sample piece. So to find that dimension of how far you have to cut down out of this transom cubby panel here, you take the 1/2 inch thickness of the UHMW, and then I just put a mark there. And then whatever's left, this top section, that's how far you have to cut from the bottom of the delta pad down.
Okay, makes sense. So we're looking at a 1/2 inch basically from this surface here to this surface there.
Yes, in this case with the 1 inch thick Spark base plate, that's the case. This other intake here would be a different dimension just because it's a thicker base plate. But you can see this one would have a 1/2 inch of UHMW, and then that leftover dimension afterwards would be is larger than this one. So you just got to make sure you got that
Makes
right.
Sense. And I guess if you're not doing UHMW, you don't have to subtract that little amount for the UHMW, and you just sink it in that much more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if you're using a different thickness, then yeah, you use that dimension instead.
Cool. Now, I guess one thing we'll touch on is obviously this intake is just for the Spark system. So if you're doing a Spark build, you're going to be using this guy. If you're doing basically any other build, you'll be using our Minijet intake there. That's a more universal application.
Yeah.
So they are a little bit different in terms of the way that we install them. Like Ben mentioned, the thickness of the base plate is slightly different between the two. Another feature that the Minijet base plate has is these integrated drain plug holes. Yeah, so this is really convenient because they'll naturally sit at the lowest point in your boat, and they have these really cool machined recesses. So the water can flow in here, and then it'll come out through that hole. And this is accessible just above your stomp grate on the outside of the boat. You just throw your drain plugs in there and there. The Spark base plate does not have the option for machined in drain plug holes. So every boat that we does gets this standard piece of tube that gets welded into the transom.
Yeah. So again, you want that beside the intake as low as you can in the boat to drain as much water out as possible. And then this we'll hole saw a hole here, and this will end up flush with the transom, and that'll accept the drain plug there right beside the stomp grate.
Awesome. And so you noticed, I guess earlier in our transom assembly, we've also pre-welded these drain plug holders. And basically the idea is that you take your drain plug out here when you're done boating, and you can stick it right in here. So it's really convenient. You never lose your drain plug. One of the cool features we've kind of designed into our hulls. Yeah. So besides that, I guess moving forward with the intake install, we have our hole cut out. What are some things, I guess, that we have to look for when we're actually dropping the intake in?
Yeah, so we want our UHMW to butt up nicely against the sides all the way around. So I have, again, that little sample piece. I'll use that, and we'll bump it up against the side of the base plate when it's sitting in there, which will set the perfect reveal for a flush edge there where the water can flow smoothly into the intake. That's one critical point. Another one is that you want to make sure that the back of the housing here is going to be flat and flush up against the back of the transom cubby there. So again, when you drop it in the hole, you just have to make sure that it's slid back, and you can look through this hole and check that it's making good contact all around. And then there will be another adapter plate that actually sandwiches the transom between the intake and that plate. So that has to be a nice fit there for it to seal.
Cool, and I'll just grab it. This guy that we're working with here. So again, Spark is a little bit different. So we've got this funky looking adapter plate. The other one is bolted there. If you're doing basically any other engine application, it'll look something similar to that on the Minijet intake, but same idea. They clamp through the transom and make sure there's a good amount of force that's sucking everything together there. So I guess the next thing that's a bit tricky is going to be marking the hole location. So you'll notice that We've got a pre-cut hole in our transom here, so it's slightly undersized for the actual intake hole here. Once we have the intake in there, we can stick a router in and kind of cut the profile to match exactly this hole location and size. But that still leaves us with these 3 bolt holes, which on the spark intake are blind. So you don't get to pass a screw through to locate them very easily, unlike on the minijet one where you can. The spark one is a little bit trickier, so how do we get around that?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways to do it. One that I like to do is with a piece of printer paper and a dirty hand. You can, without the paper moving, go in and trace all of your hole locations and the outside profile. And now that we have that trace on there, we can cut this out right on that outside edge. And once the intake is in, we can trace around this edge and then unbolt it, and then lay this onto the outside line that we've traced on, and then center punch our 3 holes perfectly from the inside.
Okay, that'll require a little bit of in and out with the intake, but we're gonna have to take it out anyway to put all of our sealant on, so it's no real big deal there.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, I guess the next step is really just gonna be floating the intake base plate in there, making sure that alignment is all correct.
Yeah, so that'll look something like this. I'll have the welder ready, and we'll place this in the hole, double check our height so we can see it's, if it's slightly under, we just need to raise this a little bit up for when we tack it, and then just make sure that all along the edge is the right height, and then apply a few tacks, and then weld it out completely from this side. And then what we'll do is flip the boat over and weld the inside so that this is completely affixed. And then we'll flip the boat back over and be ready to start UHMW at that point.
Awesome. And so I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but these corners might sit a little bit proud because of the angle of the delta pad there.
Yeah, so it's the main focus is getting the plastic to fit nicely up against the sides, and it's tricky to drop this all the way in. And on these spark ones, typically that ends up with this front edge being flush up here. It needs to go down a bit more. I'll have to tap it in, but so these corners will be exposed a little bit, and to get the plastic to flow nicely, you may have to grind that after welding.
Okay. So regular part of the process. Don't be surprised if it looks like those front corners aren't fitting exactly perfect. That kind of always needs to be touched up a little bit by hand. So
yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, I guess we'll get to fitting this guy out, tacking it in, doing that weld, and then probably flipping the boat over next, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much.
Awesome. All right, so since we last checked in, Ben's got the intake base all welded in from the bottom side as well as the inside of the boat. So as you can see, he's managed to flush down this corner while having it all welded. And I guess there's a little bit of a lead in here that we're going for the plastic as well.
So our next move is going to be to install the intake. So a little bit of prep work. Like we talked about, I drilled those 3 holes with the template. And then I've also drilled the hole. This is a Sea-Doo Spark. So there's this tube that gets installed in the adapter plate that feeds water from the pump into the boat. That's what that hole is. And then the other one there is a steering hole. So those end up, this goes on the outside, but those end up behind the adapter plate. So you want to have those pre-drilled and deburred and everything.
Depending on the donor that you're using, if you're following along with your own build at home, locations of all these things will be different, but I guess it's important to line it all up with the fasteners, the intake. When you dry fit it, make sure everything's in the right spot, because if your cooling inlet is off or your cables don't pass in the right spot, you're probably going to have a pretty bad day. Yeah.
And if you have a mini-jet intake, the instructions are really good. They'll tell you how to take care of all that.
Awesome. Yeah. So aside from that, it looks like you've, like you said, deburred and I guess sanded around the hole and everything like that.
Yeah, I've done that, and I've also wiped everything with rubbing alcohol so that our sealant sticks as best as it can. This is the stuff we use, this Sikaflex 291. It's a marine adhesive and sealant. It's the best stuff that we've found, the most durable.
Awesome.
And that's included with any mini jet intake tube of this. So.
Cool. And I guess one more thing to note, I guess you routed out the hole on the back there.
Yes.
So what's the procedure for that?
Again, you'd want to have the intake dry fitted, and this is a CUB model, so there's a pre-cut hole here that's undersized. So basically we use the flush cut bit on the router, the same one we used on the UHMW edges, and you set the depth so that your bearing runs just inside this face, which would be inside the boat. So it copies this hole perfectly into the transom panel here.
Awesome. And so that way you get the perfect fit. You're not just guessing at the location and the size of your hole, you're actually running it off of the actual hole that is going to continue through your transom. Yeah.
So we are ready to apply the glue. So I'll show the glue pattern. It is important. And on a Sea-Doo Spark, there's actually, the intake has a bit of a void here. You can see this piece is longer than this area where it's going to be glued. So we want to make sure that we don't end up just putting our sealant in the hole and not between the two pieces. So we'll run a bead around the edge here.
And so I guess a little bit of squeeze out is to be expected when we install this.
Yeah, it's to be expected and desired, just so that you know it's fully sealed.
Cool.
And so
no need to be stingy, I guess.
No. This is about I don't know, I'd call it a 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch round bead. And then we're also going to chase around the holes with an extra little loop, just to be sure that there's no leakage there.
Awesome. So yeah, going for a pretty healthy bead. We want to make sure that that main bead is on the inside of all these holes instead of the outside. That way, I guess if you have a leak in one of your holes, you don't start cavitating and losing suction on the inside. That's completely isolated. And so like Ben's done here, we want to make sure that these pockets are completely sealed to this main bead here, so there's no air that's going to get in there or water.
Yep. And then we're also going to do another pass back here on the edge, and same size bead here.
Yeah, this stuff's pretty messy. I think you can clean it up with, we use brake clean, isopropyl alcohol kind of works.
Yeah.
Best to avoid getting it on stuff that you don't want to get it on, because it'll be really hard to get it off.
Yeah.
But
it's good stuff.
It is good stuff for sure.
And same thing here, you want to make sure that there's either you got a big enough main bead that's going to squeeze across those holes, or add a bit extra.
Awesome. And same thing as the bottom. Make sure that main bead is hugging that opening tight, and then you're going out to your fastener instead of vice versa and having the bead on the outside and then your fastener on the inside.
Yeah. And then because this is a Spark, we need to actually glue this piece in. So we're going to put a small bead here. And then we're going to put this in the hole.
So that has like a little locating feature, and that height is all set correctly.
Yep. And then we also need to backfill this void so that the pipe stays stationary. So kind of let that pump in down around it. There we go.
Sweet.
So I'm going to climb in the boat and grab the intake, and it's got to hit both this surface and this surface at the same time. If you just hit one and then drag, you'll move your bead and it will potentially not seal.
Gotcha.
All right, so there we go. And then we'll just start our bolts hand tight. So we'll do all the 8 bolts here and then the 3 bolts in that plate hand tight. And then we'll come in after and snug them up the rest of the way. And that just ensures that everything's aligned as best as possible. If you were to snug these down and then go put the adapter plate on, it may be slightly off. There's clearances in these holes. So.
And so like Ben said, hand tight these guys. Do you recommend Loctite? I know sometimes that's
On these, there's going to be plenty of Sikaflex that ends up in the threads. And there's lock washers everywhere, so it should all be, none of this is going to vibrate apart. And I'm just putting a bit of pressure to squeeze the bead out, so that when I go to put the adapter plate on, the holes are close to being lined up.
And I guess it is expected that depending on how tight you were with that plate that we had in there before, if you remember the triangular plate that held the transom on, the angle might be slightly different. So it is possible that you have a little bit of a gap here, like you can see, but when we put that adapter plate on, it'll all kind of tighten up. So there you go. Ben's put the cooling spigot through, which is attached to the adapter plate. And there we are. So for this guy on the Spark, we've got just 3 fasteners. And you can already start to see that nice layer of squeeze out pretty uniformly coming in. So I'll just watch to make sure that that's continuous the entire way around to let us know that we've got that good seal. And there you go, you can see that nice curtain of Sikaflex all the way around.
Yeah, and then since this is a Spark, we need to fill up the heads of these bolts so that you can see there's sort of a channel here that allows the bolt to be installed. We want to fill that up with a bit of Sikaflex so that when the pump goes on, it seals nicely here. So what I'm going to do is steal a little extra here. Push that down into the head of the bolt, and then we'll come after with a rag and some rubbing alcohol and just clean off the excess.
So that little bit of sealing surface on the inside there is enough to seal the pump, but it's in our best interest to make sure it's as watertight as possible to make sure we're avoiding any chances of cavitation. So this doesn't have to be perfect, but as much as you can get in there, making it kind of uniform and level and just providing as good of a sealing opportunity as possible, the better.
Yeah. So we'll go tighten up the inside ones.
And I guess one more thing to note here, there's 4 holes here, up there, and there. We're not going to use those. Those are for a different application. So in this case with the Spark, don't worry if you see those unused. Perfect. And so again, you've got that nice squeeze out basically everywhere around the bottom and the back of the intake to let you know that you've got a nice seal there.
Yep.
And is there a torque setting or torque spec for these? Or
there is, so that'll be included in the manual. This gun is on low, so I'm going to go over by hand and torque it after.
Cool. And there's a special torquing pattern as well, just to make sure you get that all nice and snug down, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to warp.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, so then after that, the next step will be installing the intake grate. So Sea-Doo Spark has, there's four mounting holes. So we'll have to go and countersink that so it's a nice flush head for water to flow over it. And then back here it needs to be countersunk again so that the grate can close all the way and there's no bolt head sticking up there. So those get marked, so you have to hold the grate up and mark the 4 holes, and then I like to center punch, and then you drill the tap drill size for 5/16 right up through the intake base, and then again that will be sealed with a rubber backed washer and an eye lock on the inside. So they'll end up here, and then 2 behind. So those will get sealed with the same way as these are sealed.
Awesome.
So we had our intake all sealed in where we left off. So I drilled and tapped the 4 holes in the grate, and then affixed the grate. And there's a nut and a washer that goes on the inside of the boat on each of those 4 bolts.
So that'll be just those guys tucked under there, under the intake, and then these guys up at the front as well.
Yeah, and so now the grate is fully affixed. This is the stomping part is still loose. We're just going to leave that as is for now. So for the stomp grate, besides mounting the grate, there's also some hardware that goes up under the swim deck. So there's a UHMW block under here, and then an aluminum bracket that holds the spring that is for retracting the stomp grate. Yeah, so those get bolted on, and then at a later date here, we're going to thread these bars into the cross plate. So there's 2 of them in that orientation, and those reach through the swim deck and actuate the grate to open it, and then the springs retract to close it.
Awesome. So these clevises then are just going to hook into the holes on the back there of the grate.
Yep.
And same thing with the springs as
Yeah,
well.
and then the spring will come down and hook on the other hole there.
Awesome. So that's the whole stomp grate system kind of laid out for us.
Yep.
And so yeah, it's as simple as just doing up a few more connections for that. But like Ben mentioned, they'll be in the way while we're assembling the other stuff. So
yeah, we'll show it again when it's all complete.
Okay, so that's where we're going to end it for today. We're pretty much done with the intake with just a few extra pieces of hardware to add on later. But the next step is going to be adding UHMW plastic to the bottom of the boat. And if you noticed carefully during the video, we actually already did that about halfway through. So we'll pick up on that next time. While we're here, I also just wanted to address a topic that we're often asked about, which is using a sheet metal intake versus a cast aluminum intake like the ones you see here. So the reality of fabricated intakes is that they do have their place. For example, in our 6-foot boat, which you can see behind me, we actually use a fabricated intake. Now, I'll get into why we do that in a little bit, but the intake may seem like an easy place to cheap out on, but the reality is it's actually the complete opposite. The geometry of the intake is extremely sensitive, and it's directly linked to the performance of your boat. So it's one of the best things that you can invest in to improve the overall performance of your hull. From real world testing, as well as some computer simulations that we've done, we found that you stand to lose quite a bit of performance with a fabricated intake due to the compromises that are made to make it easily manufacturable. Namely, all the sharp corners that you'll generally see on the fabricated intake, which impede water flow, and you'll see those all over the fabricated intakes. In the case of our 826 boat, where we're only at about 30% of the power capacity of the pump, keeping weight low is a priority. It's all well and good, but when you want to go anywhere near the full amount of performance that your engine and pump are capable of, like in our 90 horsepower CUB or your higher horsepower Yamaha or Sea-Doo boat, it's well worth the few extra bucks to get a cast intake, and you can take advantage of the full amount of power with the perfectly sculpted intake geometry from something like this guy. We're not prioritizing sheet metal manufacturability over actual performance. On that note, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Make sure to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and be sure that you're subscribed to the Minijet YouTube channel so you're notified when our next video comes out. With that, see you guys later.